Good morning and welcome to What's Going On.
We're so lucky to have such a interesting guest today. Charlie, here's a nickname, O'Brien, a graduate student for just about to graduate with her master's, okay, uh, social work, and you're a macro intern. Tell us what the macro intern is in your field.
Macro social work, unlike clinical social work, which focuses more on case management, therapy, sort of what you think of about typical social work, macro focuses more on the larger picture of things. So it focuses a lot on administration, community development, community organizing, advocacy, and policy.
So you are sort of, as I recall, what we were talking about earlier, sort of pioneering in a way. You're as far as working with elders. Tell us about uh, the difference between abuse. You tell us. There were two categories, right?
Yes. So I am this graduate social work intern at Reach Beyond Domestic Violence in Waltham, which also serves the Belmont area. And what I've been working on is really looking to expand and understand the connections and the intersections between elder abuse and elder domestic violence. So I've had the opportunity to conduct a lot of interviews with various people in the community, ranging from the Executive Office of Elder Affairs, law enforcement, council on agings, domestic violence and sexual assault agencies, to really understand what the needs and barriers are for older adults accessing domestic violence services and the connections between elder abuse, caregiver stress, and domestic violence.
I gather you have seen a gap in a well orchestrated approach to dealing with the abuse of elders. So tell us a little bit more about that situation.
Sure. So after conducting all of my interviews, doing sort of a large needs assessment within the agency that I work with and in the older adult provider community, I really noticed that there was a real disconnect between elder abuse and domestic violence, when in fact most cases of what we call elder abuse are more typical of domestic violence. And I found that not only are older adults not really accessing services or understanding this connection, but a lot of well-intentioned providers also aren't understanding this connection, and therefore going by more of a caregiver stress model, or not referring older adults to supportive services typical of domestic violence.
Can you can you say first of all, excuse me, but this is Jeanette Cranshaw.
Oh,
And I'm Dolores Vidal. And I just wanted to ask you what you meant by that model, the one that they seem to adhere to more. Can you describe that?
Sure. So, caregiver stress model, basically what that means is that it says that caregivers, whether it's your spouse, your grandchild, an adult child, or your caregiver, they exercise isolated episodes of abuse due to the incredible amount of stress they're under. And although those that does occur, and obviously caregiving can be extremely stressful, in most cases of caregiver stress, I found that it was actually more typical of domestic violence models of power and control. Now, the domestic violence model, unlike the caregiver stress model, says that domestic violence and abuse occur because it's a pattern of behavior where the abuser tries to maintain power and control over the victim or over the survivor.
And it may not necessarily be intentional.
Well,
Or-
it does have to be intentional.
have to be
Unlike the caregiver stress model, domestic violence model says that it is intentional. It's a pattern of behavior, and the older adult victim or survivor feels afraid in the situation. They're
okay.
afraid of their abuser.
Oh.
And in most cases of caregiver stress and elder abuse, it's actually much more typical of domestic violence. It's just not called domestic violence because of the older adult's age.
I see. So what implications does this have for implementation vis-a-vis the law and fear that providers might have or families might have or the victims might have in bringing this to light?
Well, I found that a lot of older adults who might be experiencing domestic violence, there are a significant number of barriers for them to disclose or report the abuse. For instance, if they've experienced prolonged domestic violence, then they might have normalized it, especially considering that domestic violence wasn't even considered an official crime until 1984. They might have had previous negative experiences with law enforcement and social services, where domestic violence was seen as much more of a family private matter versus a public problem. There might be physical or disability barriers. They might depend on their caregiver, which might cause them to be fearful that they'll lose their independence if they disclose the abuse. And a lot of providers also don't really understand this connection between elder abuse and domestic violence. A lot of people also, providers, and myself included, and I'm sure everyone here, we don't like to think of an older adult who, we might see as our parent or our grandparent abusing their loved one. And a lot of us, kind of a normal response from a lot of providers is, well, if they've stayed in this abusive relationship for so long, it can't be that bad. Or they go by that caregiver stress model when in fact it's domestic violence. I also found that primary care physicians are usually the ones who an older adult will disclose the abuse to in an annual physical or whatnot. And mandated reporting oftentimes isn't followed, or when it's followed, it's not protective services who take charge of the mandated reporting aren't told that it's a case of domestic violence. So that can also be a real problem.
So what is the primary care provider's obligation legally then? What steps would
Sure.
they follow, and are they knowledgeable about this?
Well, they're supposed to be knowledgeable about it. Mandated reporting basically is for any child, a person with a disability, or anyone in the state of Massachusetts who's 60 years of age or older. And what that says is if abuse is suspected, if the person is maybe lacks capacity and is self-neglecting themselves, or if they're in an abusive situation, the doctor, the medical staff, and this is the same for people who work in social services, are supposed to file a mandated report. And so what they would do is they would call whatever service agency did the mandated reporting in their area. For instance, it's Springwell in Belmont. They would file the mandated report with an intake worker on the phone, and then they would have a certain period of time where they had to fill out a written report. At that point, the intake worker would screen the calls to determine whether or not this was something they could investigate, and then they would, if it was something that they could investigate, they would try to contact the older adult and do an investigation. But the older adult has the right to refuse the investigation and to accept or refuse any services that are offered.
I bet the inclination might be to refuse for fear of retaliation from the providers that they
Yep.
have. Is that correct? Or
Well, all reports are confidential, and anyone who makes a report, as long as they have the best intentions in mind, there's no legal services or lawsuits that can be filed against them. So mandated reporters and even non-mandated reporters, you don't have to be a mandated reporter to report, are protected under the law, and it is confidential unless they wish to have their identity disclosed to the older adult. There are a lot of barriers, obviously, that people in protective services, those are the people who actually do the investigations for the older adults, face. A lot of older adults fear that if they disclose the abuse, as I mentioned before, that they might lose their independence because they might depend on their abuser to take care of them. They might have a lot of shame and stigma attached to it, especially if they've experienced abuse for a prolonged period of time, and just a lot of the fear that goes along with that. It's also very challenging if the abuser is in the home when the protective service worker tries to go in and do an investigation or to talk with the older adult. I'm sure we can all imagine how hard it would be to disclose abuse if our abuser was right next to us or in the other room.
I was thinking of another angle that you probably are going to be checking out in your future careers, and that is what is provided to persons who have caregiving coming their way, whether it's in the home, whether, like my brother, most of the time he resides in something with WCI, Waltham Committee Incorporated. They provide a sheet this long, which they go over periodically with their client, in my brother, for example, and give me a copy for when he's home weekends or something like that. And so they work very hard to be sure that the clients, even handicapped clients, understand their rights. Is this something that is in the works too, to inform people who are being helped either in home or in an institution or nursing home? Or
Yep. Whenever Elder Protective Services gets involved, say with an investigation, which is what I was mentioning earlier, an older adult can refuse all of the services. They can accept some services if they want to. They can stop the services at any point in time, and they can tell the protective service worker that they don't want anything to do with it if they don't want to, and that's absolutely fine. We believe that older adults have the right to accept or refuse services, and that they have the right to make decisions on their own.
That's what I have felt very happy about, that my brother can speak up if he's concerned about something. And it's usually resolved with very readily, you know. It doesn't make a big brouhaha forever and ever. It's just that they all feel confident to speak up if they think something was not handled fairly.
Yes.
And so I think that's healthy too, to have the person who's being cared for feel fully informed.
Yep, and even in cases of elder domestic violence, if Elder Protective Services gets involved, it's really up to the older adult victim to decide what they want to happen to the abuser. A lot of times older adults don't disclose the abuse because they're afraid that the abuser will become incarcerated, homeless, get kicked out of the house. So there's a lot of real fears there. But in most cases, the older adult can really decide what their service plan is. There's a lot of opportunities for them to exercise choice.
So, what I find really a challenge, and I wonder if you could address this issue, is actually getting the information that you have, that you're giving us, out to the communities and to people in neighborhoods or who are in caregiving positions, in order to demystify some of this and make it okay, if you will, to deal with the problems as opposed to trying to ignore them or protect whether it's protective or not, but you think it's protective, or avoid embarrassment, or how do you, now that you're graduating from BC with your master's in social work, and you will be this, I think it's a fascinating choice you've made, by the way, but I'd be interested to know how you plan to implement this and make it available to the community in a real way.
Well, what I've been first trying to do is I've actually been going out into the community and doing trainings for providers, because throughout all my research and interviews, I found that a lot of providers who are very well-intentioned, they don't really understand that connection between elder abuse, caregiver stress, and elder domestic violence. And they might not be asking the right questions. Even during, say, like a physical exam, they might not be asking the older adult if they ever feel afraid in their home or whatnot. So what I've been doing is actually going out and training providers in healthcare settings, counsel on agings, whatnot, about these intersections between elder abuse, domestic violence, appropriate screening techniques, ways that you can support older adults, kind of what the caregiver stress model is versus the domestic violence model, some behavioral indicators to look for in among an abuser and among a victim of domestic violence, whether it's in a medical setting, a social service setting, or a home assessment. I'm really teaching them, because I feel like in order to help older adults, providers also need to be knowledgeable of this information. Another thing that needs to be done is just getting the message out there. I think that we've done a great job of talking about domestic violence among younger generations and for younger women, but a lot of older women don't understand domestic violence, or they see it purely as something that's physical abuse that occurs between a husband and wife, when it's really much more complex. Yes, and they see it as a very personal problem, because there's a lot of shame and stigma, and people just don't talk about it. People feel uncomfortable about it. So just having those conversations, having domestic violence materials with older adult faces on it versus just having younger women's faces, I think is really important. And also having increased collaboration between protective services and domestic violence agencies, I think is really important.
Is the following included in some kind of violence? What if you violate somebody's bank accounts? There have been situations where a caregiver has seen to it that the person they're caring for signs over all their money to them, or inappropriate funds or something. Is that an abuse too?
Yes, domestic violence has several different categories of abuse, which a lot of people don't understand. So under domestic violence, the different categories of abuse include financial exploitation, physical assault, sexual assault, psychological, verbal, emotional abuse, and identity or spiritual abuse. So that could be using someone's disability against them, threatening to disclose their undocumented status, or using their religion against them, saying like, you can't tell anyone about the abuse because our religion doesn't allow us to get divorced, that sort of thing. So it's using that fear and that power and control to really abuse someone and to cause them be afraid, and it's that pattern.
I'm glad we got to that. Oh my goodness, to that point, that fear, inducing fear is a form of abuse.
Yes.
So Reach Beyond Domestic Violence is the organization
Yes.
that you have been doing your internship.
Yes.
Yes. And that will end with your graduation in a couple of weeks,
Yes. Yep.
and you will be searching for a position,
Yes.
hopefully in the area.
Yes.
Well, that's great. I mean,
Hear, hear.
yeah. Is there a number that people could dial if they wanted more information from this organization, which sounds really great? Reach Beyond Domestic Violence And it's in Waltham, is that
Yes,
correct?
and
And
we
it
also-
serves the
yep.
western suburbs.
We serve the Metro West suburbs of Boston.
Mm-hmm.
We actually have a 24/7 hotline, which is anonymous and confidential. And the hotline number for that is 800-899-4000. So that's 800-899-4000. So anyone can call that number if they have questions, if they think that they're being abused, if they want help, if they are interested in going into shelter. Reach also is one of the few shelters in the state of Massachusetts that is handicap accessible.
Oh, where is this?
It's in Waltham.
Waltham.
Yep.
Waltham is always pioneering
Yes.
in things.
Yes. And we also have our community office, which you can call if you would also like support services and would like to meet with someone. And that number is 781-891-0724. That's 781-891-0724. You can also call the Executive Office of Elder Affairs and ask for their elder abuse hotline number, and you can also call that number if you are a mandated report or if you'd like to report abuse, or if you're an older adult and you want to know what your options are.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
And we also have a website that is going to be updated, and our website at Reach is www.reachma.org.
And
Reach, no dot between reach and MA?
No dot, reachma.org.
Okay, good to know.
Well, thank you very much.
Carolyn O'Brien, otherwise known as Charlie.
Yes.
Yes. I have had a notice passed to me that towards the end of the show, to let everyone know that we're very grateful to our crew, David Coyle on camera, and also provides our staff with delicious homemade brownies almost weekly. And another cameraman that's wonderful, always here, early on time, Norman Meyerhoff. Today, also, Brian Saper was here in the building, and he took over another camera. But I think the most important thing here is just for the community to know that Jeff Hansel is celebrating his wedding anniversary today. 11 years ago today, Jeff, head of the whole Belmont Media, was married in France to his wife Sophie. And he's very fluent in French. So with that,
Congratulations!
congrats to everybody. So until we see you
Next time, we remain very truly yours.
interested in what's going on.